They said brilliance had a look. It wore pressed collars, lived in quiet suburbs, and came wrapped in Ivy League dreams. But genius? Genius whispered one name from the shadows of a public school classroom in Detroit, and her name was Zariah James. Before we dive in, if you believe stories like this matter, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Let's give these voices the spotlight they deserve. The first time Zariah's name was spoken out loud at the Langston Auditorium, it wasn't in praise. It was an interruption. "Your theory is charming," said Dr. Victor Lang, peering over his gold-rimmed glasses. "But this is advanced topology, not children's riddles." The room laughed, but Zariah didn't. She simply blinked, sitting tall in her seat, clutching a faded green notebook on her lap. The equations scribbled across its pages weren't guesses. They were conclusions. She was 13, from East Detroit, and she had something to say. But the real story didn't start there. It started 2 years earlier, in a cramped one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, where the walls smelled like bleach and the floor creaked with every winter gust. Zariah's mom, Amira, worked 2 shifts at the local hospital, one as a janitor, one as a food server. Her hands were always tired, but her eyes lit up every time Zariah showed her a new number puzzle she'd cracked. "You've got that magic in you," Amira said once, tucking a loose braid behind her daughter's ear. "Just don't let this world tell you otherwise." Zariah didn't always believe her, especially not when teachers gave her extra worksheets instead of real challenges, or when classmates laughed as she tried to explain why certain prime patterns seemed to hint at dimensional symmetry. "You think you're Einstein?" one kid snorted. She didn't, but she knew she felt something when she looked at numbers, like they were alive, like they were singing something only she could hear. Then came Mr. Lennox, a substitute math teacher with frayed cuffs and a permanent coffee stain on his tie. He saw something in her immediately. He stayed after class, gave her the kind of problems meant for college students. He didn't tell her she was gifted. He told her she was undeniable. One rainy Thursday, he slid a printed flyer onto her desk. "Advanced Youth Math Initiative," she read aloud. "Hosted by Riverhall Institute," he nodded. "It's like MIT, but meaner. They're piloting a program for under-18s. You should apply." Zariah stared. "They want people from Cass District Middle? They want minds that break molds." She didn't believe it. Not until the envelope came. Not until her mom opened it with trembling hands and burst into tears. But getting in was just the beginning. Riverhall was nothing like home. It was stone columns, polished floors, and name tags that said things like Wellington and von Thalberg. Zariah walked through those halls like an echo, always present, never quite seen, until that moment in the lecture hall, until Dr. Lang dismissed her in front of everyone. And even then, she didn't fold. She simply whispered to herself what she'd once written in her notebook: "Brilliance doesn't always ask permission. Sometimes it walks in the side door." Zariah didn't cry that night. Not when Dr. Lang dismissed her. Not when the auditorium emptied out and she was left alone with the echo of laughter. Not even when she stepped outside into the cold night and realized she'd missed the last shuttle back to the dorms. But inside her notebook, a storm was brewing. Back in her room, a stark white dorm with a single bed and no posters, she turned to the page where she had jotted her alternative interpretation of the Fairchild tensor. It had started as a whim, something she saw in a late-night YouTube lecture. But the more she stared at it, the more something clicked. It wasn't about solving a problem the correct way. It was about seeing a problem no one else had even noticed. She grabbed her pen. For the next 5 hours, she wrote furiously. Topological loops, modular breakdowns, even her own symbolic notations to compress the math. It wasn't clean, it wasn't elegant, but it made sense. To her. She titled the page, Asymmetrical Dimensional Mirrors, a Divergence from Lang's Orthodoxy. She thought about submitting it. Then she remembered his smirk, the laughter. Number not yet. The days that followed were cold. Colder than winter. The kind of cold that seeps into your name. Students stopped making eye contact. No one sat next to her at lunch. When she raised her hand in class, Dr. Lang simply looked through her. But the silence gave her space. In that silence, she built a world. Every night she taped pages to her walls, creating a mosaic of thought, a gallery of contradictions and questions and hopeful maybes. Her room became a temple to math and to defiance. Amira called every night. "How's my baby genius?" Zariah smiled through it, still figuring it out. "You eating?" "Kind of." "You breathing?" "Trying." Sometimes that was enough. Then came Dr. Lin, a visiting lecturer from Korea, soft-spoken, unassuming, but his lecture on symmetry theory had Zariah's mind buzzing. After class, while others left, she lingered. "Doctor, Lin?" she asked. "Could I show you something?" He looked surprised, then nodded. She handed over her notebook, flipped to the mirror conjecture page. He scanned it for a long time, didn't speak, didn't blink. Then he said, "Where did you learn this?" "I didn't, I just saw it." He nodded slowly. "This is unconventional, but elegant, and potentially very significant." Her heart nearly leapt out of her chest. "Will you keep working on it?" he asked. "I haven't stopped." The next day, he mentioned her name in class. Not in passing, in reference, her theory, her insight. And just like that, the silence cracked. Not everyone approved. One student, Mason Whitaker, third-generation Riverhall legacy, snorted audibly. "You're really entertaining her math fantasies now?" Dr. Lin didn't flinch. I entertained brilliance, regardless of origin. That night, someone shoved her notebook off her desk in the library. Pages scattered. Zariah didn't pick them up right away. She let them sit there, watched how no one helped. Then she stood, gathered them one by one, and whispered again. Brilliance doesn't ask permission. This time it felt less like a whisper, more like a warning. By the third week at Riverhall, Zariah knew where not to sit, who not to talk to, and exactly how long a stare lasted before it turned into a warning. She'd grown used to whispers trailing behind her like static. "That's the girl who challenged Lang. The scholarship one. She's not even from a real math school." But what stung more was what no one said. No one asked her to study together. No one borrowed her notes. And even Ethan, the quiet boy from Toronto who had once smiled at her in the hallway, looked away now. Her ideas were too big, they said, too far from tradition, too dangerous. It was a Friday morning when her proposal landed on the department desk. Dr. Lin had encouraged her to formalize her thinking into a draft. 20 pages, detailed with diagrams, side calculations, footnotes. It wasn't polished, but it was bold, the mirror conjecture. A claim that certain prime sequences behaved like quantum dualities under specific geometric constraints. A theory that could upend decades of accepted understanding in field symmetry. Dr. Lang read the abstract and didn't even finish page 1. He stormed into the seminar room later that day. "We are not here to indulge speculative fiction," he barked, slapping her paper on the desk. "This is mathematics, not mythology." The room went silent. Zariah didn't argue, not because she agreed, because she was stunned. Dr. Lin cleared his throat. "She's not asking you to agree, she's asking you to consider." Lang's eyes narrowed. "Then let her earn consideration." That night, Zariah almost quit. She stared at her reflection in the window, the city lights behind her blurring like tears. "I thought they wanted innovation," she said to Amira over the phone. "They want control, baby, and you scare them." "I'm not trying to scare anyone." "You're not, but truth always rattles cages." 3 days later, someone slipped a note under her door. It was folded carefully like origami. It read, "Your conjecture, page 12. There's something there. Don't stop." No signature. But at the bottom, room 408, 4 p.m. Zariah stared, thought it might be a trap, then thought, what if it wasn't? She arrived cautiously, notebook in hand. Inside were 2 people, Ethan, the boy from Toronto, and Professor Naila Patel. Dr. Patel had a reputation, not just as a rising theoretical mind, but as someone who didn't play politics. "I read your paper," she said simply, "and if your proofs hold, it's not fantasy. It's a new lens." Zariah felt her chest tighten. "You'll need to fight for it," Dr. Patel continued, "but you won't be alone." Ethan nodded shyly. "I'd like to help, if that's okay." Zariah almost smiled. They met every afternoon for the next 2 weeks, ripping apart the conjecture, testing every edge, questioning every assumption. Ethan was brilliant with computational models. Dr. Patel brought clarity to her raw insights. They challenged her, sharpened her, and slowly the fantasy began to look more like fact. But whispers don't die easily. One morning, someone spray-painted her dorm door. Fraud. Her hands trembled as she scrubbed it off. Not from fear, from fury. That evening, she emailed Dr. Lang, subject line, "Request to present formal proof of mirror conjecture." She knew he wouldn't grant it. But she wasn't asking for permission. She was claiming her time. Monday arrived too fast. Zariah stood outside Lecture Hall B, the oldest room at Riverhall Institute, where brass doorknobs gleamed with legacy and egos filled the air like perfume. Inside, a weekly seminar unfolded. Students, faculty, alumni, everyone hungry for recognition. She wasn't on the schedule. She wasn't invited. But she came anyway. At 2:15 sharp, she opened the door. Heads turned, a few narrowed, some smirked. Dr. Lang, standing mid-discussion beside a chalkboard filled with dense geometric graphs, froze when he saw her. "I believe you've mistaken the time," he said dryly. Zariah's heart pounded, but her voice was steady. "I'd like 5 minutes to present a formal update to the mirror conjecture. I've addressed the previous concerns." Dr. Lang didn't even look at her. "No," a murmur rippled through the room. "I understand your doubts," she added, "but I found new symmetry within divergent sets that could link." "This is not an open mic," Lang cut her off. "But it should be," a voice interrupted from the back. Everyone turned. It was Dr. Yvonne Cho, head of the Department of Mathematical Logic. Legendary in her own right and rarely seen in seminars. Her presence carried weight, but her words landed like thunder. "I've reviewed her updated proof," she continued, "and I believe it warrants our time." Lang's jaw tightened. "You can't be serious." "I'm not asking, Doctor," Cho said flatly. "I'm stating my endorsement." Lang stepped aside, reluctantly. "You have 5 minutes." Zariah walked to the board. Markers in hand, she began, not with equations but with a story. A prime number has always been seen as indivisible, but what if our perception of indivisibility is warped by dimension itself? She drew a curve, a fold, a mirrored axis. In this model, primes behave differently when viewed across quantum geometries, what I call dimensional mirrors. It's not that the math was wrong, we were just looking at it through the wrong lens. Some leaned forward. Others still crossed their arms, but she continued, confident, composed. She laid out examples, simple at first, then elegantly complex. Her handwriting flowed. Her voice never wavered. This is my revised theorem, supported by data models and independently reviewed by Dr. Patel and Dr. Lin. She stepped back. Silence. Then, questions, sharp ones. What about variable decay? How do you account for anomalies in mirror folding? What proves the primes don't flatten under redefinition? Zariah answered each, clearly, methodically. Not always with ease, but with understanding. She didn't deflect, she engaged. Even Lang stayed quiet. When the last question faded, Dr. Cho stood. The department will review this further, but for now, she nodded at Zariah. Well presented. And just like that, it was over. Or so she thought. As the crowd dispersed, Lang approached. He didn't smile. He didn't congratulate. But he said through clenched words, unorthodox and incomplete. But you made me think. Zariah held his gaze. That's a start. That night in her dorm, she found another note. This one was typed. I showed your work to a colleague at Caltech. They'd like to speak with you. Dr. Cho. She read it twice. Then again. For the first time in weeks, she let herself smile. The email came at 6:14 a.m. Subject, Mirror Conjecture, Collaborative Review Invitation. From Dr. Javier Ren, Caltech Department of Quantum Mathematics. Zariah reread it in disbelief. Dr. Ren wasn't just anyone. He was a name whispered in reverence at Riverhall, a former prodigy himself. And now he wanted to review her proof. Possibly co-publish. She didn't scream, she didn't cry. She just sat there, staring at the screen, notebook clenched in her lap. But with attention came scrutiny. By midweek, her name was floating on academic blogs, whispered in academic forums. Some celebrated her. Others questioned how a 13-year-old from Detroit could have possibly cracked a theoretical wall that had stumped tenured minds. She probably had help, one thread suggested. Viral stunt, another scoffed. Too young to understand the implications of what she's claiming. Zariah read them all. Then she closed her laptop. The glow was starting to burn. Even her mentors noticed the shift. She's doubting herself, Dr. Lin said quietly to Dr. Patel after a late study session. She's terrified, Patel replied, and that's exactly what brilliance feels like, on the verge of becoming something bigger than yourself. In private, Zariah began to unravel. She second-guessed her logic, reworked her formulas late into the night, even questioned if the symmetry she saw was real, or something she wanted to be real. Amira's calls helped, but not enough. Do they still see you? Her mother asked. I think they see the math, Zariah whispered. Then that's all they ever needed. Then came the national spotlight. An education podcast featured her story. An anonymous faculty member had leaked it. They called her the Detroit Prodigy. Suddenly, journalists reached out. Science magazines, online platforms. Some offered interviews, some wanted a photo. Riverhall's dean asked her to consider a press-approved public appearance. I didn't ask for this, she said. No, Dr. Cho agreed, but brilliance doesn't hide, it inspires. That weekend, she visited home for the first time since being accepted. Cass District hadn't changed. Cracked sidewalks, corner stores with flickering signs. Her old middle school still had broken lockers and outdated textbooks, but her former math classroom, that was different. Someone had taped a printout of the podcast article on the wall. Underneath, scribbled in blue pen, Zariah sat here. She traced the words, And suddenly, the doubt cracked. Not because she had proved the world wrong, because she had proved to one girl in that classroom that genius could look like her. She returned to Riverhall with a quiet fire. No fanfare, no speeches, just the next draft of her proof. Refined, expanded, bulletproof. The final review took place on a gray Thursday. Room 217 had never been so full. Faculty members packed wall to wall, notebooks in hand, whispers darting like static. Even some grad students stood pressed against the walls, clutching coffee and curiosity. Zariah stood at the board. No blazer, no speech, just a girl with a marker. She didn't pitch, she proved. Slide by slide, line by line, she walked through the logic, layering geometric mapping, quantum symmetry, fractal overlays. The room didn't blink. Her theory didn't ask for permission anymore, it demanded recognition. Dr. Lang sat in the front row, arms crossed, expression unreadable. But this time, he didn't interrupt, not once. The Q&A was sharp, surgical. They challenged every assumption, every transformation. But Zariah stood steady, answering with confidence forged in weeks of fire. When it ended, the silence returned, and then Dr. Cho stood. In my 22 years at this institution, I have never seen such a confluence of innovation and clarity from someone at this stage of their academic life. She turned to the panel. I motion we formally recognize Zariah James's contribution as a breakthrough in prime topological modeling. There was no vote, just a standing ovation. A week later, the paper was approved for publication. Zariah James listed first among 4 contributors. Her name, printed alongside Riverhall's crest, traveled across academic journals and landed on the front page of a national education outlet. The girl who refused to ask permission. Riverhall offered her an early placement. A scholarship fund was named after her. And one morning, she walked into her old middle school library, now renamed the Zariah James Learning Center. Inside, a 5th-grade girl named Layla handed her a note. I saw you on YouTube. I showed your video to my brother. He said he didn't think black girls could do math like that. The note ended. I think you proved him wrong. Zariah keeps that note framed next to her window. Right under another quote she once scribbled in her notebook, brilliance doesn't ask permission. It just proves itself. And that was her final theorem,